I want us to become brothers again like we used to be, and for us to find ourselves and bond with each other. Can we agree to that?
Opinions vary.
Welcome to a bonus episode of Three Brothers Filmcast. As the world spent the last couple weeks focused on the passing of Queen Elizabeth and the state of the British monarchy, the film world lost what many might consider one of the royals of cinema, as much as he might have hated that notion. Jean-Luc Godard passed away on September 13th at the age of 91. Godard's influence on cinema is hard to overstate, as he was one of the key founders of the French New Wave movement and the last of a generation of European cinematic masters to pass. There is no more Ingmar Bergman, no Antonioni, no Fellini, no Truffaut, even Agnes Varda. Godard is now the last one to go, and it feels like a turning point in cinema, regardless of your thoughts on his oeuvre as a whole. Godard, along with Truffaut, began as a critic for the Cahiers du Cinéma before deciding that the best way to critique and push the limits of cinema was to make films for himself. His 1960 feature debut, A Bout de Souffle, or Breathless, kicked off a new kind of French cinema, one that cast off the French tradition of quality in favor of freedom in terms of content. Here he draws on disreputable American crime films and noirs that he loved, and in form, his jump cuts, the handheld camera, cinema verite, work at aiming at vitality and a sense of spontaneity. He would remain for his entire career someone who pushed the limits of cinema in terms of craft and content. He dabbled in Maoism and then experimented with digital video long before it was common. Godard was a true experimenter and a scathing critic of cinema, but also someone who clearly loved the medium in his own way. And he remained committed to making films up until near the end, releasing 2 features in the last decade of his life. I've not seen nearly all of his films, but I've seen a good number from various periods of his life. The ones I particularly like include 2 or 3 Things I Know About Her and his offbeat sci-fi noir Alphaville, in addition to Breathless, Masculin-Feminin, and others. I didn't always appreciate his films on first viewing, but I've grown at least to respect and accept the challenges he posed about the limits of the medium and the nature of cinema. So Aaron, I'll ask you to start. Do you have a favorite Godard films? Are you a fan of his work, of either his early exuberant 60s work, his strident political work of the 70s, and have you seen any of his late period work?
I haven't really seen any of his late work. I have kind of a complicated, I wouldn't say relationship to Godard, that might be not the right term, but complicated thoughts about him in that I think of him very similarly to a lot of the modernist artists or postmodern artists, like painters, in that I understand the importance and the influence, but I'm not sure I like the art. So like my favorite Godard films are his earlier ones before I think his deep cynicism started creating a combative stance with the person watching the movie, which I think is actually, it's present in all his works. But I find very off-putting, especially as like a filmmaker. I find that a very antithetical way of approaching filmmaking.
I think I would mention that I think what you're identifying is the turn after the 68 student riots and his more overtly political work. He probably was upset and angry with a lot of the people, both in the cinema and the audiences, that, you know, that earlier he might have had more hope for.
Yeah. So, like, I would say, like, Masculin-Feminin is probably my favorite, largely because of the cast. That's Anna Karina and Jean-Pierre Léaud.
Yep.
And I think they're very fun together. It's the one that I think has the Coca-Cola Marxism kind of approach very, very well.
Yes.
And it's also the one where I think his enthusiasm for the possibility of the form comes out in a way where it becomes infectious for the viewer, even if he's still, within the structure and the form, he is critiquing other ways of doing things implicitly. It's less abrasive, and he doesn't seem to be getting in his own way, either in terms of adding theory into the film or simply making it like unwatchable to make some kind of point. So I haven't seen film Socialism, but like I know about the infamous thing because it was filmed in 3D where he splits the 3D where one side of the screen is like he desyncs it. And people are like, it's so brilliant. I'm like, well, it's brilliant in the way that like an art installation is, but as a movie, you've broken the movie. Like it's now unwatchable. Congratulations. So it's more like conceptually interesting than actually. Like, there's nothing to watch. You can't see it. Like,
the last one of his that I saw was in Praise of Love, L'Éloge de l'Amour, which is a digital work and explores aspects around like the Holocaust and memory and the way that different film mediums have a different sort of testimonial relationship to reality in a sense. So I find that
What
one
year
again.
is that one?
It's 2000. I want to say 2000s, late 2000s. But again, it's a film that I more respect and than it enjoyed. I think is a fair way to say it. Whereas I do actually enjoy some of his early movies. I think Breathless is still really fun.
Yeah.
I think Alphaville is actually kind of fun in the way it plays with like noir and having the sort of the black and white detective character in this sci-fi world. It's not really sci-fi. It's so clearly like 60s Paris, but it also plays on like the modernism of it'd be interesting to contrast something like Alphaville with like Jacques Tati's Playtime and the whole what was going on in Europe with the new buildings and modernity and things like that. I also agree with you, Aaron, that it really depends on the performers. I think his earlier work with when he had like Anna Karina when he was married to her, it shows that he really like the camera loved her in those movies. And I think probably the other one that is one of his other masterpieces, if not maybe his best film, is Vivre sa vie, like My Life to Live, about Anna Karina as a prostitute, and it's made up of a series of sequences, and it's quite good. But it almost moves into more Bressonian territory, so that's probably why I like it, rather than some of his more irreverent and work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty similar to you guys in this, or more to Aaron probably in that, like, I've seen, a good chunk of his 60s work, and then I've never really seen his, like, very political 70s stuff, his late stuff. I've always, again, like, I think your phrase, Anders, of appreciation without necessarily, like, liking. It's hard to sort of, I think, like, I like Breathless quite a bit. When I saw it, I didn't love Band of Outsiders when I saw it. I recently rewatched Masculin-Feminin like last week after he had died, and I was like, oh no, like I really like that movie. I think partly what's great about that movie is that it really the self-critique, the fact that it's clearly critiquing also the kind of like people who was making those kinds of films with the blend of the Marx and Coca-Cola, the blend of the people.
The radical impulse to be a commercial filmmaker.
Yeah. They were wanting to be radicals, but and it like because that there's sort of that self-critique rather than sort of the confrontationalness. I obviously understand that a confrontational stance can be like an artistic standpoint one might take, but like it necessarily involves that you might lose your audience, or you might draw them in, and that's the play he was willing to take, right?
So like Le Chinois, Tout va bien, which he made with Jane Fonda, those ones I actually haven't seen them, and that's when he became very like explicitly political in his sort of like that period. And then I actually do want to check. I've heard nothing but good things. I've never seen his King Lear, which I'm kind of curious about in the 80s. So.
No, I would like to see that. I'd be curious.
But
I saw Alphaville for the first time in 2020, and I had tweeted about this like a few months ago. That was just sort of like, it was a movie that I watched, I liked it, but then it's really been lingering around in my mind, and I like it more and more the more I think about it. And I like it's actually a movie where I think it's like its experimental approach actually like it isn't just deconstructive, but it actually like adds something to our understanding. Like the idea of making his sort of technocratic dystopia actually just present day when he was shooting at France and aspects of it, right? Shooting in those modernist buildings, as you said, the certain architecture and stuff, actually holds a lot of meaning and conveys a lot of meaning about sort of an emergent dystopia that's sort of laid over the present and ongoing. So like there's a movie, and I think there's something about artists like him where the iconoclastic artist, or the person who seeks out to break things in order to potentially remake them. It is a certain task that, like, in some sense, it has to happen every now and then in art forms. But on some level, the experimenter and the iconoclast are most valuable for how they influence others than for necessarily, like, I'm not trying to say, like, Godard isn't important, but he's so important partly because so much of what he broke down is just reabsorbed and became how he did things in film afterwards. And like that's probably his significance. It's almost more the influence he's had on others. Like I can't point to any of his movies personally. I just can't point to any of his movies and be like, I adore this as a work of art. But some of them I really admire what he's like trying to do in it.
Yeah, Aaron, I know you were always more of a Truffaut guy.
Well, yeah, with the new wave, I like the fact that Truffaut is a little more, I mean, he's more sentimental, and that's like obvious. He's obviously working more in autofiction, which is something that Godard, like, it slips in there through like self-critique or through, you know, he's interrogating impulses of his own artistic ability, but it's not really making movies about himself. Yeah. My issues with Godard come down to like, some of his films, like for instance, I watched 2 or 3 things I Know About Her recently, and there are aspects of that film where I'm just like, this ceases to be a movie about anything but you.
Yeah, because it becomes so self-absorbed in the process of like...
Well, it's his whispering narration about all the things, all the anxieties that bother him, which is an interesting concept to have in there. But again, why is it presented through a slightly grating whisper?
Puisque je ne peux pas m'arracher à l'objectivité qui m'écrase, ni à la subjectivité qui m'exile.
It's kind of similar in Alphaville, the fact that the giant technocratic machine is...
Où êtes-vous né?
À Nueva York.
Quel âge avez-vous?
Je ne sais pas, 45 ans.
Votre marque de voiture?
Ford Galaxy.
Yeah, that like
the whole time. It just has this awful
raspy,
low pitch, and you're like, you know this is annoying, but you push it so hard that it's like, okay, you're challenging me. You're trying to come. You are embedding a thematic substance into the actual form to a point where I am now rejecting it because I'm supposed to reject that in the story or the theme. But like, if I stop watching your movie, see, it's just the reason why I think it's a little more different than, it's a different relationship between the relationship between a filmmaker and a person watching a movie, I think is different than the relationship between a person reading a book, artist, like a writer and a person reading a book, or a painter and a person looking at a painting, is that the film is a totalizing experience. In that, if I'm to engage with it, I have to allow it the entirety of my attention. I can't just close the book, come back to it later when I'm ready to not get upset about it. It's not a painting where I can walk away and walk back to it. It's a movie. The movie keeps playing, so if I break the engagement, I'm no longer actually engaging with the movie at all. And so there's this thing, it's like, well, are you just tough? I don't know. I think there's this impulse.
So it's maybe like someone
like
Michael Haneke is like, the modern version of that, where like pushing the limits of like punishing the audience for like, funny games. It's like, actually, you're a bad person for watching this movie.
Well, I think there's
I don't know if Godard goes that far.
No,
always,
I don't think he goes.
It's more. I think it is more self-critical in a way.
I don't think he goes that far. But what I'm saying is that if you have essentially been like, you are purposefully making your art grating and ugly and arch and almost like purposefully difficult to wrestle with, to the point where I no longer want to engage with it. It seems like more of a wrestling match than an art piece. Like, and I think the piece, I don't want to ascribe a bunch of stuff to people who like absolutely adore Godard, but I do think there's a bit of a like poserishness thing where the people who love a lot of people online, which is lots of posing, is that they love Godard because he is the person they want to be, which is the cool badass film critic who becomes an experimental filmmaker Marxist who is dating the hot chicks and telling the world to F off. It's not that they actually like, I haven't in much of the appreciations of Godard, aside from like Richard Brody and some of the others who actually really engage with them as texts, I have not seen appreciations that go beyond the affect of Godard and the idea that he had his combative stance towards his audience was actually
that's more of an
virtue.
Indictment of film Twitter, Aaron.
Okay.
No, it's an indictment of criticism, but him being a critic, becoming a artist, means that he already had this idea of, I can master the material because I've mastered it from a critical lens. Now I'm going to master it from the artist lens. The thing is, like, if you're going to compare him to, say, a Picasso, I always say this, Picasso's art is great because he learned to paint it like all the other painters, and then he did it better than them, and then he deconstructed it. It's not that he just skipped straight to the deconstruction.
Yeah, but I would say that's why Breathless is so important, because I actually think Breathless is just a entertaining, like, good film.
Yeah. But so,
right? He starts with Breathless. He says, "Here's entertainment. Here's my."
But he's already
take
breaking
on,
a ton of rules in Breathless.
Yeah, but
here's the thing. He doesn't. This, I think this partly explains Godard, that we have to remember that he's coming at this from, he was a critic and then he became the filmmaker, and there Godard has a special appeal for people and he's especially appealing to criticism because he's very interesting to talk about and to analyze.
Yeah, he's just loaded with themes.
The question I think Aaron's getting at is that how does this work on an audience? And I think maybe like I do have a very positive thing to end off about an aspect of his films. But so like I'm someone who studies estranging devices in literature, specifically in John Donne.
Like,
how do you make things strange, challenging, difficult for a reader? But my thing is that with a poem by John Donne, a sonnet that you actually have to wrestle with to understand, that is off-putting at points, because it's a poem, it's easy to read it once, have that sort of distancing experience, and come back at it.
Yeah.
Which is a challenge, I think, for the use of like distanciation or estrangement, or whatever you want to call it, is this. The question is that where do you see the process playing out in the actual first viewing? Are you trying to distance an audience, and then by the end you're trying to sort of bring them back in to understand certain things, or is this the kind of thing where they should then walk away out of the movie and be like, I don't get that, think about it, rewatch the movie? It's a question that I think is worth thinking about.
And the other thing I will say, Aaron, about like the sort of Picasso analogy is like like Truffaut had the famous essay that launched it, on a certain tendency in French cinema, that him and Godard were tired of these. They're always based on classic literature. They're always reputable. They have to have like these clear, like, particular trajectories and messages. And you could say, well, you could still make a film that's really engaging. I would argue that actually they're building on, that Truffaut and Godard are already building on the shoulders of certain earlier French filmmakers who had already challenged the cinema of quality in France. Like, I would say Renoir myself, like with Rules of the Game and stuff like that, and Grand Illusion. And then, or you want to go even earlier, I mean, like, really, is Jean Vigo he was doing the new wave before World War II, right? So like Truffaut and Godard are kind of semi-consciously picking up on that, those threads of film that were moving through there, where they were still making, coherent, entertaining, united pieces, and then pushing it forward. I mean, it's a bit of a standing on the shoulders of giants kind of thing, but I would say that's the only thing I would temper in terms of saying like whether or not he could actually do it, But
that always becomes a question with artists, where it's like, if you're going to do like a consciously low grade, where you're like, we're purposely trying to make this sort of rough and dirty.
Yeah. But it wasn't even that they consciously, approach. It was like they didn't have the money, right? Like they only got some of that stuff off the ground because Jean-Pierre Melville is like, you guys here, come and use my some stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying I dislike Godard, but I wrestle with him, and I struggle with embracing him, and I don't even when you said he's he's the last of these masters, and I'm like, I wouldn't say he's a master. I think he's extremely influential, but I haven't seen evidence of him mastering cinema ever. I've seen very interesting examples of cinema, but even compared to somebody like Antonioni, who I struggle with a lot too, there is a overwhelming artistry that I find present in Antonioni's work that I really do struggle to see in some of Godard's works, where all I'm seeing is him.
But I realize that to have my own, to see the right story I want to see, I have to participate, and I can't only give $5 and receive a huge piece of fantasy or mystery or something. I have to work on it. I feel responsible of what I see, and the best way to answer to this responsibility is to go on to making movie. In that, so I'm at least sure I will receive the right movie for me to see, or if I don't, I will be responsible for it because I've made it.
Yeah, and I would agree. Like, let's say someone else, the other French New Wave director who passed away in the last couple of years was Agnès Varda. I don't know if you've seen many of her films beyond Cleo.
I've only seen Cleo.
Gleaners and I, one of her more films from the late 90s, is fantastic. Sort of auto documentary kind of thing, maybe more in that Truffaut mode, but it's I think that over time, you're right that some people may reappraise some of these people. I'll put my cards on the table that I'm kind of always more of a left bank fan, like Renee and Marker and Varda were more.
Yeah, see, I don't really like Marker.
I kind of like, yeah.
Like I struggle with him too. So you mentioned him briefly, but my thing is like very clearly the best filmmaker of France in the 1960s is the guy who was the counter to the new wave, the established dude Jean-Pierre Melville. Like he's better than all of them.
Melville isn't.
Because he's doing things that are actually attacking some aspects of the system in the same way, but he's doing it through entertainment, which I think somebody like Godard would say, well, that's bullshit. You can't actually deconstruct a system from within it. You can't critique. There's all this voiceover stuff in Two or Three Things I Know About Her about how can you refine capital when you're like a part of it, and it's like, well, I don't know, man.
That's just a condition of life, man. Right? Like, of course, I don't know what his actual relationship. Like Melville is in Breathless. So.
No, I know. But see, that's some of the things is that there's these other aspects of Godard where, like, you guys both know this about me because as, the non-academic brother of the three of us, like, I'm kind of allergic to theory. I don't like it because I think that theories, maybe I shouldn't even say this, but, like, theories written by people who can't make an art say something, so they write theory. Like... Because they can't make something look like life, so they break it down into something else, which is valuable in its own sense, but that I don't find it art. So
I think there's some truth to that comment.
So I struggle with some of his movies where I don't know how artistically important it is. I think it might be formally important or thematically important, or it's important in the history of cinema. It's very important. But I want somebody out there listening, maybe. Like I know there's some people who listen to this who are big fans of Godard, and I want to know what they find so essential about him as a filmmaker and about that act of watching his movies. It can't just be the ideas. Like, what is it that makes the watching of the movie essential?
So one thing, and I don't think this characterizes all his films, and I haven't seen anything close to all his films, right? But specifically his 60s films, apart from the, their film innovations, their play with the forms of film, the other thing I would say for them, from the ones I've seen, specifically the ones that are set in Paris in the 60s, right? Like, so not Alphaville, which is, right, sort of science fiction, but Breathless, especially Masculin-Feminin. What I think they also hold value for is in the cinema verite aspect of them, in that I think they're very good at presenting what it might have been like to live in 60s Paris among these type of people. In capturing the feel of that, the sort of vitality, but at the same time the underlying sort of angst, ennui that is sort of undergirding all of this, the flirtation with rebellion and revolution culminating in 1968, but also, right, it's the children of Marx and Coca-Cola. It's still a capitalist society, mm-hmm. And I think that there's something enjoyable about that. In terms of entertaining, there's something where it's like, oh, like, there's something cool about aspects of these films that is entertaining, and I think there's some truth in them about their portrayal of a period. So in some weird sense, it's almost like a period piece.
Yeah, a document of a bygone age. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time on Three Brothers Filmcast.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.
I bid you farewell.